In this video, I'm going to discuss ordering a metal roof for your house. To order a metal roof, it's important to understand all the different pieces that you're going to be ordering and how to measure for them so that you order an adequate amount. The first step I recommend is finding out who you're likely to order your metal roof from. And this will involve finding out suppliers in your local area and finding out who they get their metal roofs from or if they manufacture their own roofs. And the reason you want to do this is you want to try to find out if the manufacturer has any information online or perhaps even pamphlets that they might be able to give you that has information about the different types of roofing components that they offer. Now, the good thing is that even if you can't find this information from the roof supplier that you're going to be dealing with, the terminology between the different roof manufacturers is, for the most part, identical. So if you have to go to another manufacturer's website just to get information, that's probably going to be okay. The only significant difference that you should be aware of is while the names of the pieces and the terminology will likely be the same, the profile of the pieces, meaning when you look at the end of them, the shape of the piece from viewing it from the end, the profile may be different between different manufacturers. Now, this is not likely to cause too much of a problem, but it's just something to be aware of, that when you're looking at one manufacturer, that may not be what the piece that you get will look like. So I deal with generally two different manufacturers, one down in Florida who has a great online resource, but then I also deal with one up in Atlanta that doesn't really have anything online. They have pamphlets where they can give me, but I have to actually go to the store to get those. And I'd much rather go to a website and see what I need to see there. Now, even though the manufacturer up in Atlanta doesn't provide an online website, I can still use the Florida one just because, like I said, things are so similar. So if you can't find resources for your manufacturer online, I recommend going to one of the websites that I use. For one of the suppliers that I use is Semco Southeastern Metals, and their website is semetals.com. Now, if you go there, they have they're a roof supplier, and they have a lot of literature out there on the different products that they have. So if you click on the literature button on their website, this takes you to a page that has all the different pamphlets for all the different products. And there's several different types of panels that they sell that have different profiles. Now, since I'm not going to be actually buying their product, I found the profile of a product that they sell that's extremely similar to what I'll be buying up here. And this one just happens to be SM Rib Detail Manual. So in this manual, it has a bunch of great information, and one of the things I like the best is they've got an illustration of a house, and on that illustration they show all the different components and where they fit into the roof, and then they show you the names of them. And so just having this information and kind of mapping this model to your house, you can really find out what the pieces are that you're going to need, and it'll allow you to be a little bit more educated when you go to order your roof from your manufacturer. Now, the first piece of the roof that we're going to need to install and order is what's called drip edge. And drip edge goes along the bottom edge of your roof, and what it does is it protects the fascia board. So as water runs down and comes off the panel, you don't want that water running down your fascia board. If the fascia board stays wet, it may start to rot, and it'll definitely start to look bad as it'll get dark and start to get moldy. So the drip edge will cover that up, and at the bottom of the drip edge, it has a little bit of a lip. So here's an illustration. So number one, we've got the drip edge going along the bottom edge of your roof. And you can see here that it's got a little bit of a lip at the bottom, so that as the water runs down, where it's not running on your fascia board, and as it comes off that piece, there's a little bit of a kick out, and that water will get kicked out and then fall safely away from the fascia board. So a lot of the water will miss the fascia board. So if we scroll down and look at the actual profile of the piece, now there is this is for the fascia cover. This profile is for this piece, or this page is for this piece. But this picture is a little bit better than the picture for the actual drip edge. So you can see here, we've got a little bit of a kick out, and then it also has a little bit of a ledge up here. Now, this is not, as I said, between different manufacturers, you may get a different profile. From the company that I order from up here, I don't get this. There's not this little bit of a ledge. But this is the one that I'm more concerned about, because the roof is going to hang over, the panels are going to hang over this. They're not going to end directly at the end of the drip edge. So I don't feel like this little lip is as important, since the panels themselves are going to provide that for you. But then this lip obviously is important. So when I order this, another thing to think about, another thing to be aware of, is that if we look back on here, you can see that there's an angle here. And so this is perpendicular to the ground, but then this piece of the drip edge mimics the angle of the roof. So when you order this, you really need to specify what angle you want this to be spread at. This is not a 90-degree angle. And if you order it without specifying it, very likely you're going to get a piece that they just bend to 90 degrees. Now you can bend this wider once you get it. It's fairly thin metal, but because this piece isn't very big, this is only a couple inches and a couple inches. It doesn't bend very easily. What I've done is I put it in place, and then I'll push down on it, and by pushing down on it, you'll start to spread it open, and then you can nail it down quickly, and it'll hold in place, especially once you get the panels on. But it's kind of a pain to work with if it's not at the angle that you need it at. So you'll definitely want to specify an angle if you can. So in this particular example, if I look at this roof, now you can do this. You can take this measurement once the house is built. You can just take out a speed square and do the measurement. Or if you have the plans, you can do this way. So I'm going to take the angle measurement, and now let me close this. And now at the bottom there, bottom right, you may not be able to see that, but it's 131 degrees. So I would order these pieces to be 131 degrees. Now, because of this roof design, I actually have two different angles. So I've got an angle up here. This roof is not as steep, and I've already taken that measurement, and that's 105 degrees. So the pieces that I would order for up here would be 105 degrees, and then the pieces down here would be 130 degrees approximately. Now this section right here is 2 foot, but I also want to have a little bit of extra material to play around with, because I'm going to want to bend it around the side. I'm going to cut it, and when we get to the installation of this, you'll see what I mean. So I don't want to order just for a 2 foot piece. Whenever there's an end, I want to order a little bit extra so I can wrap it around. And that's about 3 inches I like to order, so 3 inches on either side. So this section right here, I would order a 2.5 foot section, and I've got 4 of these, so that works out to be 10 feet. And the material, the trim pieces, come in 10 foot sections, so which works out really well. I only have to order 1 piece. Now, be aware that these trim pieces, are pretty inexpensive. I think a 10 foot trim piece of drip edge cost me about $2.50. So it may be a little wasteful to order an extra piece. You may end up throwing some of it away, but this is the very first piece. You cannot proceed without putting the drip edge on, because everything goes on top of that. So if you were to only order 1 piece and you made a mistake, especially since it's the first piece you'll be installing, the first time you'll be playing with metal, you may make a mistake, and then the entire roof job will be halted. So for the $2.50, you may consider ordering an extra piece. Just be aware that you may just end up just throwing it away. Now, if for this section, this is a 12 foot span. So a 10 foot piece isn't going to cover it. So I need 10 feet and then a 2 foot piece. But on this side, I need the same thing. So what I can do is just order 2 10 foot pieces and then a third 10 foot piece that I'll share between both sides. So I'll need a total of 3 10 foot pieces with 105 degrees. And I've got a little bit of playroom there. It's not super tight on the amount that I'm using. But for this, since it's just the right amount, I would go ahead and order 2 10 foot lengths at 131 degrees. Now the next part that we'll be installing are the roof panels themselves. Now the roof panels go over the drip edge, but almost every other piece in the roof goes on top of the roof panels. Now, as you can see in my design, I actually need 2 different sized panels. I need a longer panel for this steeper roof, and then I need a shorter panel for up here. Now you should read the specifications for the panels that you're buying, because they usually specify how far over the edge of the roof the panel should extend. So what you'll need to do is you'll need to decide how long to order the panels. So let's look at this longer panel. If I take my tape measure and I go up to almost the peak, and I bring down, I've got 5 foot 4 inches that I need to order for this panel. But then I also have to account for the fascia board, which will be a 1/2 inch, and then I also have to account for the fact that they recommend the panel extending 1 inch beyond the edge of the roof. So I'd actually add on 1.5 inches onto this length. Now, if you're not exact, it doesn't have to be exact to the 1/2 inch, because the ridge cap that you're going to be putting on will extend down the roof, probably 4 to 6 inches on either side of it. So if you're off by an inch, it'll still be covered up, you'll be fine. But also, if you cut it a little bit too long, if you order it a little bit too long, you can cut it back a little bit. I've done that before, expecting just to be careful, order it a little bit long. But then I was kind of disappointed because I ended up having to cut every one of my pieces, and cutting them across the ridges is a little bit more challenging than cutting it lengthwise, because going over the ridges, it's hard to take snips and cut over the ridges. So I ended up having to take a grinder to grind that off. So if you look here, here's an illustration of one of the panels. Now these panels are about a little bit over 3 feet wide, and I say over because they actually overlap each other to make a seal. So when they're overlapped, they end up being, as you add on, 3 panels make 9 feet, a little bit over 9 feet, and 2 panels make a little bit over 6 feet. So they're actually just a little bit beyond 3 feet, so that when they're overlapped, they still make a total of 3 feet. So if we look back on the model here, this wall section, this roof section, as we've already measured, is about 2 feet wide. So I just need to order 1 panel for each one of these sections. So I've got 4 sections of this roof, and I'll be throwing away about a foot of each panel. But that's just the way they come. Now you might think, well, if you added a total up, you might say, well, I've got 2 plus 2 is 4, plus 4 is 8. I've got 8 feet. Well, that fits within 3 panels, which would be 9 feet. So you could stretch it out and combine panels, but what that does is that creates an extra seam there on one of your small sections of roof, and you really want to try to avoid as many seams as possible. It's just safe to avoid the seams. So I would go ahead and just spend the money and get the 4 different panels, and that way you can have 4 continuous panels on all of these sections if you had a roof like this. Now on this section, I know that this section is about 12 feet wide. So in that case, I would have 4 panels. Now, you're getting pretty close to being right on the edge, and I don't like the idea of not having any room to play. You might end up having to shift these panels over up to 6 inches, and I'll explain why in a little bit. But if you have a 12-foot roof and you can fit exactly 4 panels, I would really recommend getting a 5th panel for this section as well, because if you have to shift them, you may have to shift them to where where you wouldn't have enough room. And the reason you have to shift them, that you might have to shift them, is later on I'll be explaining what Gable rake is. But when you put Gable rake on, that's gonna, let me go back to this display. So this is the profile of the piece. The Gable rake will have to make contact in one of these valleys. The Gable rake can't make contact on one of these hills that are in the profile of this piece. It has to be in a valley. So it's easy to line up the first piece, but when you put all the panels together, you have to make sure that when you lined up the first piece, you didn't sabotage yourself to where the Gable rake on the completely opposite end of the roof is now going to lie on one of the hills. I've done that before, where I'll install the first panel, it'll look perfect, I'll make my way down, and then all of a sudden I get to the very other end, and lo and behold, my Gable rake is landing on a hill, one of the hills in this profile. And that can't be. You can't, it just won't work that way. So I've had to go and take out every one of my panels and shift them by, an inch and a half or 2 inches, just so that it doesn't, the Gable rake doesn't lie on one of these hills on either end of it. So once again, for this particular roof, in this design, and obviously your design would be different, I'm going to order a total of 4 of the longer panels, and then a total of 10 of these shorter panels. Now the next part that we'll talk about is the Gable rake. The Gable rake is similar to the drip edge that we talked about, but this goes along the edge of the roof on a gable end, and it covers up a little bit of the fascia board. And it also, another big difference between the drip edge and the Gable rake is the Gable rake goes on top of the roof material, but it still does cover up a little bit of the fascia board, and also has the kick out that allows the drip to drip away from the fascia board. So if we look at, here's a profile of a piece of Gable rake, and as I just said, the Gable rake, when it comes in contact with the roof, it has to be in a valley. It can't be up here. The Gable rake will just look really weird if it's pushed up like that. And so you have to make sure that on both ends of your wall, the Gable rake is going to fall into a valley. I can't tell you this enough, because it's a major pain to go back and pull up all this roof. Now once again, as I said, we've got a little bit of a kick out, and because it's on the side, we have to put a screw into it to secure it. And you can see here that the roof material doesn't actually go to the end. There's a little bit of a pocket in here, and we're going to put some butylene sealant tape on here, and I'll talk about that in a little while. So this will be protected. You've got it secured down at the bottom, and you've got it over a valley. You've got the tape here. Even if you didn't have the tape here, assuming there's assuming there's a hump here, then the water, would very unlikely get in here. So this area is pretty protected. So you have a little bit of room to shift it. It doesn't have to come right up to the edge. But so let's go back to the model. So to measure this, I would just take a tape measure and go from the where's my tape measure? Just go from the peak and come down, and that's 5'4" approximately. That's the same length as the roof panel. Now, when you cut this, you're going to actually cut it straight down to make it even with to try to line it up with the fascia board. And so it actually has to be a little bit longer than the length of the panels. This one's going to be cut straight down. So this is a shorter cut. This is shortening the length of the material, but this one is actually extending beyond the length of the material, beyond the 5'4". So for this, I'd really recommend adding about 4 inches onto there. So that's 5'8". And now these panels, all these pieces, all these trim pieces usually come in 10-foot sections. So this one's kind of a difficult one because you really need to order, for this particular section of wall, I need to order 4 different pieces, and there's going to be quite a bit of waste here. Now I have these other ones, and this is 4'7". That's 4'7". So I could probably go ahead and use a single piece, 1/2 of the piece, or approximately a little bit more than 1/2 of the piece for this piece of gable rake, and then the remaining section for this piece of gable rake. And once again, you could piece pieces together, but you're going to have a seam, and I would prefer, especially on this piece of material, not to have a seam. I prefer to reduce seams all over the place. But as you're pulling the trailer, down the road, there's going to be a lot of wind hitting this section of the house on the other side, since that side will be going forward. But and so if there's a seam there, it might start to bend the material up a little bit, and it probably won't tear it off or anything, but you'll have a little bit of a spread there, and it won't look as attractive. So I wouldn't want to put a seam on the front of the house, on the front of the trailer, but I also wouldn't want to put a seam on the back of the trailer either, because that's where the front door is at, and that's where it's gonna look. You want that to look the nicest. Now, if you do have to put a seam, make sure you overlap the top piece on top of the bottom piece. You don't want water running down the gable rake and hitting that seam and being able to work behind the lower piece of gable rake. So for this particular house, I would order a total of 4 10-foot sections of gable rake, and I might even throw in an extra one just to be careful. Once again, they're fairly inexpensive, so I like to have one extra piece occasionally for certain pieces. Now the next piece is the sidewall flashing. Now the sidewall flashing is very similar to the gable rake, except while the gable rake covers up part of the roof and then comes down along the front of the gable end, the sidewall flashing goes up along where a wall and the roof come in contact with each other. So it will cover up a section of the roof just like the gable rake, but instead of going down around the front of the gable end, it actually goes up the wall. So, and this piece of metal that goes up the wall will be tucked up underneath the whatever siding you decide to use, so that as the water runs down the siding, it'll run down across the bottom edge of your siding and into this metal valley where the water can just run out. So here's the profile of the sidewall flashing. As you can see here, it comes in contact with the roof in the valley of the panel. And so you need to once again make sure that when you put the panel down, both this piece and the gable rake are gonna lie in the valley, and then this piece of metal goes up the wall instead of around the bottom, and it's screwed into the wall up there. And then you've got your siding that covers the metal. So as water runs down the siding, it comes into this valley, and then it runs down the bottom of your roof. So let's look at it on this picture. We can see number 8, sidewall flashing. The metal goes up the wall and then across the roof. Here's an image of it right here. And it would go right along here, as I said before, goes right along the roof and the wall. This piece isn't going to be able to make it all the way up to the top of the roof because we've got this overhang here. But I want to try to get it up as far as possible. Now there's going to be a piece of wood up underneath here. So what I'm seeing here, I'm looking farther up than when the house is built, how far I'll be able to look up. So for the measurement of this piece, I would probably just go ahead and order the same amount. We knew that this, let's measure this again. We know that this is 5'4". The piece of metal is not going to be able to go all the way up to the roof and it's not going to be necessary because you've got this overhang here that's going to be hiding the upper portion of it. So I think about 5 feet would be more than enough. I don't think we're even going to use that. But given that the pieces come in 10-foot lengths, I would go ahead and order 2 lengths of the sidewall flashing. And that would be 5 foot for this section and all 4 of these, 5 feet for all 4 of these, the ends of the dormers. The next piece is the ridge cap. Now the ridge cap is generally pretty simple. Once again, for this particular roof design, it's a little bit more complex. This trailer is 12 feet long, and I've got a 1 foot overhang on each end, so it's 14 feet. So if the roof was just a standard roof, I could get away with just ordering 2 pieces, and I would just have a seam somewhere in the middle. I would, you could just run the 10-foot length. I'd probably have about a 1 foot overlap here on the roof, and I would double tape that, and we'll get to the tape in a second. And then you'd have a 10-foot section and then a 5-foot section, or you could just cross it over in the middle. If you're going to throw the pieces away anyways, you could just, you could run the 10-foot section and the 10-foot section, and you would just have a double ridge cap also. Now because of this particular roof design, I've got a change in the pitch of the ridge cap. So let's look at the profile of the ridge cap. Ridge cap is number 4 on this particular diagram. It goes along the ridge, and we can see, now here they have actually 2 different ridge caps. So this is, you can find this within the manufacturer, and then also different manufacturers have different profiles. This particular ridge cap has a little bit of a kick up. So we've got this seam here that we can screw into, and then it kicks up and it kind of gets a little bit elevated over the ridge. And this one is just a flat piece. Now I personally like this piece. I've always ordered this piece. It just has a little bit more finish to me, a finished look. This, it's all one piece, and when you put the screws in, I never felt as good about this piece. So I like to order this piece. So here's the profile of that piece. And let me show you real quick the profile of this other piece. So this piece is the one that I'm not as fond of. It's just really flat and really understated. And it shows, when I've used it, because it's so flat, it shows wrinkles. So as you put the screws in, as you tighten those screws in, you flex the steel a little bit. And when it's just all flat like this, it really shows that to me. Now if you look at this piece, this is the profile. Let me zoom in. This is the profile of the piece that has the kick up. I call it what I call a kick up. And I just like that better. As you tighten down on these little flanges that they put on here, this angle here reinforces it, and so you just don't see any of these variations up in this part. So as I said, it's completely personal preference, but this is the one I like. Now you can see how far down this comes on the roof. So so even here they show a 1.5 inch maximum. So if you're, as I said earlier, you don't have to be exactly where the roof panels touch each other. That can be kind of difficult to work with, and so they're saying that you can have up to 1.5 inches. I would prefer not to have that much room. I'm really, 1 inch is probably my comfort level, but this is going to be sealed off. This isn't going to be sealed off as well as the end wall, the sidewall flashing and the gable rake, where you've got the contact being made in a valley. So we're going to be able to put tape here. On these pieces, this is lying on top of the ridges of the panel. So you can't just run tape across that because it's not making a continuous seam. Instead, what we're going to put in here is closers. Here's a universal closer, it's listed here. And I'll talk about those in a second. But those are just pieces of foam, and so they're not going to have as good of a seal. So I prefer not to have as big of a gap here. But going back to this model, because I've got a different angle, and this particular piece, it's so easy to bend that you don't really specify an angle for it like you do with the drip edge. You can just easily, it's very big, so you have a lot of torque on it when you start to push down on the ends. So they're just gonna give it to you as it is, and you can easily make adjustments. Now because this has a different angle, I'll be using one piece up here and then smaller pieces for these 2 ends. Now I don't want there to be a crack between these two. I don't want this section to end right here and then this top piece to end right here, because what that'll do is that'll create a little bit of a crack that water could get in right at that one little spot here, right on that one edge. So what I'm going to do is, what I do is add another little piece of metal that I'll hammer into place that'll be hidden by the ridge cap. So I'll take a little section of ridge cap and just hammer it down to fit the contours of these two sections of the roof, and then I'll install the small section of ridge here, and then the larger section of ridge here. So I need a 12-foot section, I need two 1-foot sections, and then I need another 1.5-foot section on each side. So that's 1.5 plus 1.5 is 3, 1 plus 1 is 2, so that's 5, and then 12. So I can get away with ordering two 10-foot lengths. I'm just going to have to do a little bit more work because of this design, but so I'll need two of those. Now the last piece that we're going to have to order is the end wall flashing, and that's going to cover the transition between the wall and the roof on this end. Let me show you the diagram. We have here number 10 is end wall flashing, and you see a roof, and then see the wall, it goes up the wall, and then it comes down the metal roof. And this part that goes up the wall, just like with the sidewall flashing, is going to go underneath your siding. So as water runs down your siding, it's going to hit this little valley here, the little piece of metal, and then transition onto your roof. And this will prevent water from running down the wall and then getting underneath the roof on the back end, and then running down the wall or down the roof underneath the roof. So this is only going to be used here, and we only got one piece. So this is less than 8 feet wide, just a little bit less than 8 feet wide. So a 10-foot piece will cover this entire house. Now lastly, you're going to need some accessory items. These include screws, seal tape, closures, both inside and out, and I'll get to that in a second, and then caulk. Now the screws are special screws because first off, they have a color matched head. So it matches, the head of the screw matches the color whatever you pick for your panel. So it's kind of nice because it blends in a little bit. But more importantly, it has a special ring of sealant around the head of the screw so that as you tighten it down, it self-seals the hole that you've pre-drilled wherever the screw is going. So you don't have to worry about that drilling that little hole and water getting down in there. So those are really nice. Now they come in different sizes, and most of the screws are going to be down in the valleys. So you're going to be screwing down in the valleys of each of your panels, and then when you attach a piece of trim, that's also going to be down in the valley. But on the ridge vent, there's going to be a ridge cap. They're actually going to be up on the peaks of the panel. So you have the option to install, I've done it both ways, where you can use a 1.5-inch screw consistently throughout all of your screwing, or you could use a smaller screw perhaps in the valleys, and then a longer screw when you're doing the ridge ridge cap. But you can just buy, I just buy usually the 1.5-inch color match screws. The next thing is this butyl sealant tape. Now this is to go wherever two pieces of metal come in contact, specifically in a valley. So when you've got your sidewall flashing or your gable rake, when those pieces are running parallel with the panels and they're coming in contact with the panels in a valley, you're going to want to run a small strip of this sealant tape. Now this sealant tape is very weird. It's not like tape like you might imagine. It's almost like a caulk on a roll. And it'll stretch very easily. So when you unroll it, you want to be once it comes separated by paper. The tape is actually on a piece of paper that you'll peel away. And once it becomes separated from that paper, especially if it's hot outside, it's going to want to stretch very easily. So try to leave it on the paper as long as possible, and then you won't have that problem. Now they also recommend putting this tape where the panels come in contact with each other if your slope of your roof is lower. So if you don't have a steep slope and the water is going to sit on the roof for a little while, it's not going to evacuate as quickly because it's really steep, then they recommend putting this between the panels. I do it anyways, regardless of the slope of the panel, because it doesn't cost that much more, and it's not a very big job. So for me, it's just worth it to put it on there. And next we have this tube sealant. The sealant isn't like a caulk; it's almost like a tar. It's very similar to the sealant tape, but it's color matched also usually, and it's, like I said, it's like a tar, so it comes out and it's really thick and it's really good for sealing any holes. So I always get a couple tubes of this, and it's not something that you can get in Home Depot. You wouldn't find it, and it even with the roofing, they have a roofing caulk there, but it's just not as good as this tube sealant. And lastly, we have the closers. Now, closers are, let's see if we can zoom in on an image of a closer. Now, these are pieces of foam, and some of them have an adhesive on the back and some don't. There's inside closers and outside closers. And what these do is these match the profile of the panel. And so on the bottom of the panel, where the panel is mostly flat with the surface, and then it raises up for the peaks, this goes underneath, right along the bottom. And what that does is it prevents wind from coming in and getting up into up underneath your panel and forcing water up in there. So when it rains, water's less likely to slide back underneath your panel. So this goes underneath your panel on top of the drip edge, because the drip edge comes up on the roof about 2 inches. So this will go right in that little space. And then this is for the top of the panel. So this matches if you were to put this piece on top of this, it's almost like a mirrored image of it. So this goes on top of the panel, but underneath the ridge cap piece. So when the ridge cap goes from peak to peak on your panels, there's a hole left in the valleys. There's a hole where water could slide up underneath there and go in that crack that's left when two panels meet at your very peak. So this is to seal that off. And these are very important because you don't want water to get blown up into that area, because it could be a sizable hole up there, and so you'll want to make sure that you install these.